Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, 6 Ways EVs Will Create Global Change for Capital Equipment Suppliers and Metal Formers, presented by Simpac America and hosted by Metal Forming Magazine at the Precision Metal Forming Association. My name is Brad Kuban. I'm the editorial director of Metal Forming, and I'm pleased to serve as your moderator for today's session. Before we get started, just a few notes about the go-to meeting. It is being recorded for archiving, and the recorded event will be posted to our website within the next few days. We'll send you an email when that recorded webinar is available for viewing online. Also, all the participants in this meeting are in listen-only mode. That means that the speaker and other attendees will not be able to hear any audio from your site during the program. However, you can communicate with us throughout the webinar by submitting your questions and any comments using the question box, which is located on that right-hand control panel on your go-to screen. So you'll simply type your question to an organizer as selected from the drop-down menu. Then you'll use that same question panel to ask questions of our speaker at the end of the presentation. So let's go ahead and begin today's webinar. Our speaker this afternoon is Stefan Robertson, General Manager and Vice President of Sales and Operations at Simpac America. Hopefully you joined us for Stefan's earlier webinar back in July titled Stamping EV Battery Parts for Automotive, when he discussed a variety of trends and their impact on our market and described several battery components and the press technology recommended for stamping them. So today we're going to go a little bit further into the topic and including a discussion on how capital equipment suppliers and metal formers can address EV fact versus fiction, understand why stamped automotive parts will either be removed or become completely irrelevant, and then also learn some of the appropriate responses to EV advancements, global changes, and current economic circumstances. Stefan Robertson has more than 30 years of experience in the metal forming industry, with customer satisfaction and brand integrity being his highest priority. And we're, of course, very excited to welcome him back. So, Stefan, go ahead and take it away.
Well, Brad, thank you very much. First of all, good afternoon. My name is Stefan Robertson, and I'm the General Manager and VP of Sales and Operations for Simpac North America. And I'm here today to give a presentation on the 6 ways EVs will create global change for the capital equipment suppliers and metal formers. Before I do, though, I'd like to give a shout out to both Brad and Marlene from Metal Forming Magazine for the introduction and for all the hard work they have done in setting this up. I'd also like to give a thank you to my inside sales and marketing manager, Jamie, for helping with all the research that went into this presentation. And without her help, it would definitely not be as successful. Now, if you're able to attend our first webinar, you got a more quantitative look at the current and future trends of the EV industry. Here in part 2, we're going to go a little bit more focused on why you should care about the new EV advancements that are starting to affect the market. So with that said, we did extensive research on some of the advancements in the industry and came up with 6 different ways that we feel things will be globally impacted specifically for capital equipment suppliers and metal formers. Our goal here is to have you use this as a helpful resource, obviously for your future business plans. First and foremost, as partnerships between automotive and battery OEMs formulate, we need to look at the overall short to long-term profitability and how this new EV technology will affect capital equipment suppliers and metal formers alike. You'll naturally notice some overlap as we go through this presentation, especially when talking about GM, Tesla, and Ford in both of the first several sections. Now, before we move forward though, we took some of the feedback from our first webinar and incorporated it into this one. As such, you'll see several things, such as the 2 icons on the bottom right side of the slide. These indicate where we feel certain points are more informative for either capital equipment suppliers and or metal formers. Also, throughout the presentation, you will see little icons in regards to fact/fiction points when talking about EVs that also give helpful insights in regards to the different sections that are being discussed. So before we get into the first section too deeply, I was able to get 2 industry leaders to give a little insight as to how they see the market changing and or expanding. The first quote comes from Tim McCoy, and he's the Global Sales Director of Automation for Lincoln Electric. He was my mentor for many years when I worked for Schuler, and I wouldn't be here today in this position if it wasn't for him. The second quote comes from Rama Yayawira, which I'm probably butchering his last name, so I apologize, Rama, president of Linear Automation. We're sometimes friendly competitors in the automation field and also sometimes work with each other, as has been highlighted with the recent 1,000-ton transfer press that has been installed in Springfield, Tennessee. Now, I'm not going to read the quotes out loud, but they're both very insightful and spot on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause here for a couple seconds, have a sip of water, let you read these things yourselves, and then we'll continue on. So in this slide, we talk about Tesla, what they're doing to work on driving costs down / increase profitability. Now, it is important to note that while all OEMs are working on battery costs and efficiencies of scale, Tesla has also pushed forward with a rather unique way of reducing costs of their vehicles by also focusing on aluminum die casting of the undercarriage of the vehicle. By using this type of process, Tesla is able to reduce up to 70 individual parts, not to mention all the processes associated with the assembly and having one final part produced. Now, is this overall process slower than traditional stamping? Yes, but also think of what hydroforming has been able to do in a smaller way with the traditional engine cradles and subframes. Is this process going to cost more in the beginning phase of production? Most likely. Think of the initial cost of purchasing a gigapress coupled with the fact of the limited potential flexibility these presses have. Will there be challenges if the quality of the aluminum or the process isn't done correctly? Oh, most assuredly. However, when done correctly, the combining of multiple processes and parts into one final piece now drastically reduces quality controls for different incoming parts, as well as the overall costs of automation and manpower that would be required to make all the different parts into one bottom frame. If Tesla also uses this process to further streamline the different platforms into using the same core bottom frame, and as an example, think of what VW and Audi have done over the last years. They will then be able to further reduce their stamping footprint, as well as all the different processes that go with it. Now, let's not forget the battery. As we will state in many of the future slides, batteries can potentially account for anywhere between 20 to 30% of the overall cost of the vehicle. So getting the price of the battery down while also increasing the charge life is very important. To that end, Tesla has continued to work with different battery producers, including Panasonic, as well as working on their own battery advancements. By continuing to work on reducing the cobalt content, as well as working on the new technology 2170 lithium-ion cells, Tesla continues to work on reducing the overall cost structure of the batteries, while also working on improving the charge capacity and longevity. In this slide, we talk about GM, their potential partnership with Nikola, as well as a collaboration of GM and Honda. As per what we discussed in the first webinar regarding the Ultium drive system and Hydrotech fuel cells, GM is now potentially working with Nikola to provide this technology to the Badger pickup truck and potentially other vehicles that Nikola will produce. There have obviously been many discussions and articles published online about the potential of GM purchasing up to an 11% stake in Nikola, and while the verdict is still out, I personally can't imagine that GM would purchase something in the EV field without having done their proper due diligence first. Obviously, time will tell on this, but it makes one wonder if all the new EV companies out there are really in it to win it, so to speak, or just out there to show a one-hit wonder and then be eventually gobbled up by a true automotive powerhouse. GM has also shown they do not have a problem with working with the competition, as showcased with their collaboration with Honda on both EV and internal combustion engines. One has to give credit to GM for their aggressive push into the EV market, whether it is by doing things themselves or pursuing partnerships and/or collaborations with other companies to advance their profitability and shareholder value. So on this slide, we're going to touch on Ford, LG Chemicals, Hyzon Motors, and Skeleton Technologies. I'd like you to note that there are so many different examples out there in the market right now that it's almost impossible to talk about each and every one of them. Plus, I'm fairly sure that after 1 hour, you're pretty much done with hearing me speak. First, let's touch on Ford. Please note that we talk about Ford in more detail in the next section. But what is interesting to note is their partnership with both VW and Rivian. Like GM, Ford is showing an increasing willingness to partner with the competition in order to achieve their EV goals. There's also been rumors flying around over the last week that Ford might also produce their own EV batteries in order to not be dependent on either the competition or be considered one of the many. Interestingly, LG Chemicals has been setting up joint ventures with several OEMs and has already established JVs with GM and Geely, to mention a few. What is even more interesting to note is that LG has decided to split off its battery business into a separate unit. Now, does this mean that companies like GM or Tesla might try and purchase them? Or does this mean that LG is looking at new sources of cash in order to power forward as a potential leader in the EV battery market? And to be honest, only time will tell. Hyzon Motors. Now, the French energy giant Total has invested in Hyzon's hydrogen energy cell technology with a plan on delivering 5,000 of these fuel cell trucks over the next 3 years, and with the plan to have capacity to be able to deliver 40,000 of these by 2025. Now, what's interesting to note is these are a direct competitor to Nikola. So this will be interesting to see who gets the market first, and more importantly, who will still be around in 2030, / who will be that one-hit wonder and get purchased by a bigger fish. Next, we have Skeleton Technologies. Now, they are saying they're currently on track to achieve their goals of a super battery, and it's by using a groundbreaking graphene technology, which has a 15-second charge time. What is yet to be seen is what the costs of this battery are and what the charge life is over a several-year usage. Now, everybody who knows me knows that I'm half German. And also, since I know that Germany has always prided themselves as the engineering capital of the world, I'm certainly looking forward to hearing more about what this new potential technology might bring to us in the future. Now that we've talked a little bit about how companies are working on different technologies to maintain and/or increase their profitability, we'd now like to discuss the commoditization of the EV market and what specific advancements are going to be driving this change. With this slide, we wanted to show you a little bit on who is bringing out new EV vehicles, when they are being planned on coming out, what the general pricing per se is for each of these vehicles. Now, before we talk too much about this slide, I just wanted to note there are already multiple companies with EV vehicles out there in the market. Two of the examples are GM and Toyota. GM currently has an EV Bolt with an MSRP of a shade over $37,000. Toyota, while not a complete EV vehicle, has a gas-electric hybrid. It's called a Prius, and it runs around $28,000 to $34,000. Now, quite honest, I use the example of Toyota more so because my cousin, who lives in Arizona, owns a Prius, and he told me that he's already driven over 300,000 miles on his car, and he quite literally only puts gas into it about every 3 to 4 months. I just wanted to mention these two cars because when you look at the chart, it seems to be a little bit sparse in the $30,000 to $40,000 range. But I firmly believe that you'll see more vehicles coming into the market in this price range in the near future. Please also note that there are many companies that have not been mentioned in this slide due to the time constraints of this webinar. Some of them, for example, are BMW, Volvo, Toyota, Hyundai, Kia, GAC Motors, and Daimler. And yes, I'm missing a whole bunch of other ones. First, let's talk about some of the highlights in this slide. Tesla. Now, they have repeatedly teased about a $25,000 vehicle, but have yet to show this. Maybe you ask yourself, is this marketing or will this actually happen? Now, Tesla previously stated that the Model 3 would be priced at $35,000, but the actual cost came in a hair under $38,000. Now, to be honest, with the advancements of battery technology, we're very confident in time Tesla will not only meet, but they will exceed their goals that they have set for themselves, not only in pricing, but also in technological advancements. Lordstown and Lucid Motors have both stated that they will have their vehicles to market by mid of 2021. And this is important to note because these are both startups. Wuling is a joint venture between GM, SAIC, and SGMW, and has already achieved a price under the $25,000 target at $4,400. Now, this is obviously a no-frills vehicle, but what this shows is that a low-cost EV vehicle is definitely possible. Now, when you look at the slide, the first thing you might think is, oh my God, who's going to buy these things? I mean, the overall price on some of these is like $60,000, $70,000, $80,000, $90,000. Well, let's use a couple examples here of why I don't really think that those prices are that out of line. First, remember when the VCR first came out and everybody said it was way too expensive? And I know I did. Well, that didn't stop any of my friends or work associates from buying one because they had to be the first. Then within 3 to 5 years, the prices had dropped by more than 50%. Now, next example, and we all pretty much have one. What about the latest iPhone that comes out each year that seems to be more and more expensive, yet everybody seems to have the latest and greatest iPhone? One other thing to note, and this is obviously important, is that I believe that EV companies need to be better in their marketing of the feature benefits of owning an EV vehicle, such as doing a better sales pitch about what a future customer saves when going to EV. Is the EV vehicle generally more expensive at purchase? Yeah, most of the time that is a definite yes. But what is still to be shown, still has to be shown, is the more effectiveness is the overall cost of the vehicle over its life, whether we're talking about maintenance or fuel consumption or the lack thereof. One other thing that needs to be better marketed is the push for the appeal to the younger generations. In most cases, they really want to go green. So why aren't OEMs doing a better job of selling them on it? Now, one must also take into consideration that the market will consolidate over time and pricing will most definitely come down, just like what we used in some of our examples, through advancements and additional competition. So this will definitely help in the sales and marketing pitch moving forward. In this slide and the next two slides, we use specific examples from 3 different OEMs as to what they're doing in the areas of commoditization. Again, we're quite literally only mentioning 3 companies due to the time limits of this presentation. First, let's talk about Tesla. I'm certainly not going to read verbatim everything on this slide, but there are several highlights worth noting, and not surprisingly, it's all about batteries. Whether it's talking about the acquisition of the battery themselves, producing batteries, or the actual technology of the batteries, Tesla, as have the other OEMs, has recognized that there's a huge potential for the commoditization of the battery. This will be realized through a combination of new tech as well as expanded and more efficient manufacturing processes. Now, I'll probably say this a couple times in the presentation. Just as a friendly reminder, everyone who has signed up for this presentation gets a copy of this presentation. So even though I'm going through some of the slides maybe a little faster than one might like, you can always look at everything after the webinar and send either Jamie or myself a follow-up question if you have any. GM. We have discussed the Ultium drive system in our first webinar, and we're talking about it again, as this has the potential to be a huge game changer in the EV field. Whether it's by making the technology themselves or collaborating with certain key competitors, GM has shown that they are uniquely positioned for the EV wave to come. With that said, GM has gone so far as to state that they plan on having a global market share of 7.3% of the EV market by 2027. And when you look at how many companies are out there with new EV vehicle launches, that alone is a massive statement. Last, but certainly not least, we come to Ford. Over the last 5 days, there's been a lot of talk about Ford and its EV plans in the news, from potentially making their own in-house battery to certain potential mergers and acquisitions. Ford is definitely not sitting idle. With a forecast plan of 5.7% of the global EV market by 2027, Ford is definitely making its presence known in the EV field. The F-150 and Mustang Mach-E are two stunning products that are coming to market, and we have no doubt there'll be more to follow. Of course, one of the biggest current challenges that I personally see that Ford is going to have is their battery life / time between charges. But we believe that this will also be solved shortly as well. So next point we'd like to talk about is production ramp-ups. And yes, here's where we talk a little bit about Simpaq and their press technologies related to the EV market. This section is important to me, obviously, and hopefully is as well for the metal forming industry, as we will now discuss a little more about how the stamping market will change over the next 5 to 10 years because of the changes that are happening to the EV market. Now, before we start talking about the production ramp-ups that are and will be happening everywhere, I'd like to take a minute and recognize our partners at DNS, located in Hastings, Michigan. Mike Stout, president of DNS, was nice enough to give us a quote as to what he sees in the market when it comes to the future needs of the stamping industry, not only for the EV market, but for the overall market as a whole, especially when it comes to stamping of higher strength materials and/or aluminum. Now, once again, I'm going to take a small break here so you can read Mike's quote. Also, one thing to note, in a couple slides here, we're going to talk about larger presses and press lines. Due to space constraints, one of the larger presses that we're talking about is obviously Simpaq's next generation SV4P2000 servo press. And that you see as a picture that's right next to Mike Stout's bio. In this slide and the next, Simpaq would like to talk about some of the presses and/or press systems that we see currently being purchased for the EV market. In this slide, we are seeing more and more Asian tiers and OEMs purchasing our MC series type of press, either in a line, as shown here, or as a standalone press for the manufacture of battery packs, cells, and/or modules. We also showed this in our first webinar. But since then, we've had multiple non-American stamping companies purchase these lines for delivery into the North American market. Due to NDAs in place, we're obviously not at liberty to discuss who has purchased these lines or how many have been purchased by whom. But we are able to say that since our first webinar, the number of what has been purchased for the North American market has been considerably larger than anticipated or, for that matter, expected. And the standard line mix that we're seeing is ranging from a 300 to 500 ton range for a press line. In this next slide, we show our large press lines and standalone presses. I just mentioned in the 2 slides before, based on the space constraints, we only show the press line here, but we did show the SV4P next to Mike Stout in 2 slides before. And these are also being purchased for either existing or new products in the EV market. Now, if you look at the parts that are being shown as an example on this page, many of these parts fall away when you talk about the Tesla plant. However, many companies are using a different model / a hybrid model by stamping higher and higher strength materials and/or aluminum. And as such, higher tonnage presses, either as a standalone press or press line, are going to be needed. This then exemplifies the need for either standard mechanical or servo-driven presses to accommodate these existing and/or future needs. Now that we've talked a little bit about what types of presses that companies are currently purchasing from Simpac for the North American market, we also want to highlight some of the OEMs, either automotive or battery, what they are doing to be able to ramp up their production in order to meet future demands. First, let's talk about Tesla. Elon Musk is hoping to eventually produce 20 million vehicles per year globally. In order to do that, he started to work on putting multiple things in place. First and foremost, and we have talked about this multiple times now throughout the presentation, is the battery. Not only have they been hard at work at improving the battery design, but have also been hard at work at expanding battery production capacities worldwide. Whether it's by increasing their supercharger stalls or increasing the production of gigawatt hours, Tesla has driven home the need for improvements in the battery availability, life, and chargeability. Now, before I go on, I'd like you to take a look at the EV fact versus fiction section at the bottom of this page, especially in the context of the expected lifespans of vehicles now and in the future. Expanding on our first presentation, GM's commitment to invest $20 billion over the next 3 to 5 years in EVs, we can now see where some of these monies are actually going. $6.7 billion is going to either upgrading existing brownfields or building greenfields over the next 2 to 3 years. We have the potential purchase of an 11% or more stake in Nikola. The dollar amount and percentage of ownership is obviously still TBD, and hopefully things will become clearer by beginning to mid of December. Next, GM is launching 20 new EV models by 2023, with another 11 by 2025. Where would we be without a little GM rumor? It has been rumored that GM might actually spin off a separate EV unit as a standalone green vehicle company. Now, this would definitely be very exciting and would also substantially increase the shareholder value of the company. Ford. As we've stated before, Ford has definitely gotten some attention over the last 5 days in the news. With their new EV F-150 and Mustang Mach-8, as well as their announcement of investing $11.5 billion by 2022 in EV, Ford is showing that they're in it to win it for the long haul. QuantumScape. Now, mentioning this because this is very interesting because it's a partnership between Bill Gates and VW. And they've raised over $500 million to date for EV battery developments and future productions. Now, I personally do not see a person like Bill Gates doing anything halfway. As such, this will definitely be an interesting company to follow in the next months and years going forward. In these next 3 slides, we're going to concentrate on Europe and Asia and their determination to completely get away from gasoline-powered engines in the future. As we stated in the first presentation, this is a nice thought in theory, but the practicality of it might be a little bit harder to accomplish, especially since Europe has set a target of 2040 for this goal. In this slide, we talk about 4 different players in the EV field. Volta Trucks. This would be a competitor to Hyzon and Nikola, albeit this is EV and they are hydrogen fuel cell. The biggest challenge for all of these is the drive time between single charge. This is still pretty low and will definitely need to be improved. Northvolt. A major investor in this company is VW, and they are also working on the recycling process side of the EV battery business as well. Now, we will definitely be discussing recycling in a later slide. They're certainly to be considered a future potential player in the industry, however. Verkor. This is another major battery supplier for the European market. PSA Group. With their mergers and acquisitions, they are planning on controlling approximately 4.2% of the global EV vehicle market by 2027. Now, it is important to note that as we showed in our first presentation, the EV market will most likely expand and get a larger acceptance ratio faster in Europe as opposed to the US due to the average shorter driving distances, larger population masses in smaller areas, and larger government investments and subsidies in the technology. In this slide, we talk about several different companies, but there are also many others we could discuss, such as Tesla, GM, and Ford, just to name a few. Due to the type of government that China has, it's easy to see how the EV market has a huge potential to massively expand in the coming years. To be quite honest, if the Chinese government wants it, it will happen. With that said, there are several EV startups such as NIO, Xpeng Incorporated, LI Auto, and WM Motor that have combined raised over $8 billion in investments to start up their companies. China's strict new green car rules are pushing the entire industry in Asia to move even faster to EV vehicles. Now, one non-Chinese company, besides Tesla, of course, that has been pouring money into China is VW. With their planned $15 billion worth of investments in China's EV market, they're definitely a company that is poised to take advantage of the upcoming Chinese EV trend. Continuing on with Asia, let's talk a little bit about not just the vehicles that will be produced or the batteries that will be made, or for that matter, about all the new stamping presses and automation that will need to be purchased. We need to talk a little bit about the raw materials needed to make EVs run. For instance, when you look at Indonesia, you see that they currently hold approximately 25% of the entire global reserves of nickel, one of the key building blocks for EV batteries. Battery manufacturers such as CATL and LG Chemicals have hinted at multiple billions of dollars in investments in projects to improve the supply chains in India, as well as the making of battery pack assemblies there. With that said, let's circle back to North America. Now, the biggest challenges that North America faces in their drive towards EV dominance is the need for raw materials, as most of this is found offshore. We have seen this with the need for rare earth minerals, especially when you take into context of how much of these we need in our everyday lives, let alone what might be needed for EVs. The aluminum and super high-strength steel supplies also need to be stabilized with less of a reliance on other countries for these materials. Now, with that said, in the area of aluminum, we have named a few of the suppliers that have been working hard on this, and they're mentioned in our EV fact line at the bottom of this slide. Now that we've touched on some of the different types of production ramp-ups we can expect to see in the coming months and years, let's talk a little bit about the sustainability and eco-friendly processes that we can hopefully expect to see with this shift to EV. Now, even though we only have one slide allocated for this section, this is by far one of the most important sections when thinking about the EV market and to a greater extent, energy independence for North America. And we're only talking about one recycler here, but we did mention Northvolt earlier. And I'm pretty sure that there are others as well, but once again, due to time limitations of this webinar, we're only going to talk about this one example. Redwood Materials. They're in the process of not only working on becoming the world's largest EV battery recycler, but also taking electronic scrap and recycling this as well. As more of these B2B recycling facilities come online, materials like cobalt, lithium, and nickel, that's just to name a few, will be funneled back to the OEMs. Based on Redwood's current business model, they will be able to reduce the cost of the mining of these materials by 50% over the next 10 years, and thus help the EV industry further reduce their costs and dependency on offshore countries. Now, before we go on, I just want to note that it is important to look at the EV fact versus fiction section here, as well, as this dispels some of what the naysayers have definitely been preaching. Next, we have operations and digitization. In the post-COVID-19 world, how can we better prepare ourselves for less disruptions and better productivity? I mean, just think of Zoom for 1 second. I mean, how many of us even knew what Zoom was 12 months ago? Now, there's a lot of information on this slide, and some of this is already happening, and some of this will be happening in the near future. When we talk about onshoring or nearshoring, this is something that we have seen more and more recently, especially since either certain countries over the last couple of years have no longer become cost competitive, or in a larger sense, when you think of COVID, when the supply chain breaks down due to disruptions. Now, people can argue this will increase our costs, and in some instances, it might. But when you look at the raw good or the simple part and take the next 2 points into consideration, that cost goes down and the price becomes more in line with what was purchased offshore. So first, let's talk about IIoT, or the Industrial Internet of Things. When you digitize and connect everything, you enable a smart factory to make just-in-time products for localized regions, thus reducing WIP and the potential of over-purchasing a product only because of order mints. Now, think for a minute of what companies like Nike and Adidas have done here in North America with their smart factories. They make a product in the US, they sell it for a competitive price, and make a profit. Now, it can be argued that shoes and apparel are a lot simpler to make than that of EVs, but the sampling is there, and it's up to the smart people out there to make it work for our industry as well. Now, last but not least is training. I could go on for days about the needs for, and I'm going to repeat this several times, training, training, training. As the technology of the stamping and automation equipment becomes more complex, as the technology gets more advanced, and as things get more and more digitized, it becomes even more important for companies to realize that their most important asset is the people that they employ. If you do not continue to properly train your workforce, you will not become independent in the future of EV. And if you are not able to control your own destiny, then you're going to let somebody else control it for you. Now, I have a quote here. Some people are going to say it came from Lee Iacocca. Other people are going to say it came from George Patton. I did a little research, and I found out that one of our founding fathers, Thomas Paine, has actually been attributed with the saying, lead, follow, or get out of the way. Now you need to ask yourselves, do you want to be the leader in the EV world, or do you want to follow the leader? Or even worse, are you just meant to eventually get out of the way? Now, that heavy quote per se of the presentation is out of the way. We now have to come to our last section, Millennials and Generation Z influencers. As these generations become more and more prevalent in the industry, the overall way of doing business will definitely change as well. Sorry about that. Let's first talk about COVID-19 and what this has at least taught us here, or at least with myself, at Simpac. First of all, we had multiple buy-offs that were happening in Korea during the beginning of the shutdowns. And it was obviously March through June of this year. And as such, we weren't able to be on site with our customers to review the equipment for buy-off. This forced us to focus solely on a non-human interface / interaction in order to make sure everything was properly bought off before being shipped to North America. Now, to say this was a challenge is definitely an understatement, but we succeeded. And with each new buy-off, we have become more and more efficient. Now, what does this have to do with the younger generation, you might say? Well, Generation Z and the Millennials account for 48% of the current workforce, and that is only going to increase over the next years. These generations are more tech savvy and more inclined to look outside the box when thinking of digitized solutions. With that in mind, Simpac is proud to announce that they're in the finalization stage of a collaboration XR initiative, which you hope to be able to announce by the end of this year / beginning of next year. Customers in the future will be able to access their equipment in a virtual setting, whether it's during the actual manufacturing phase or during the in-plant buyout. Now, just a quick note for those who are out there and asking, well, what in the world is XR? It's considered under the extended reality umbrella that encompasses augmented, virtual, and mixed reality. This collaboration will provide customers with the ability to view their purchased equipment virtually. While this won't completely remove the need for in-person visits to the manufacturing facility, and it certainly doesn't take away the time difference between countries, it will reduce the need for multiple visits, especially when you're talking about a large system or line. This will also, in effect, help the customer further reduce their cost burden of doing business. This will not only work in the sense of manufacturing or buy-offs, but in the future, this will also enable the customer to talk live / have a video feed to the piece of equipment during service discussions, buy-offs, and or emergencies. We at Simpac understand we're definitely not perfect, but we also know that we do not want to follow, and we are certainly not going to get out of the way. And as such, we are looking forward to leading with the next generation XR capabilities in order to better service our customers for the future. This will also provide more safety to our customers during current, by this we mean talking about COVID, and future global disruptions that might happen in our ever-changing world. So that is our presentation. Now, before we go into the questions that I've racked up during this time, I'd like to once again thank not only Jamie, but everybody at Metal Forming and everybody that's listened to my presentation for taking time out of their busy schedules to listen to this webinar. And I hope this will help you in the future. Thank you very much.
Excellent, Stefan. Thank you for that really detailed and, well, you sure covered a lot of ground in less than 40 minutes. I know that people are going to want a copy of the presentation, and like I mentioned in the introduction, it will be up on our website within the next day or two. We'll send everybody a link where you'll be able to download the presentation. So again, we're open for questions. We got 10 or 15 minutes left. Please fire away. Use the right-hand control panel, the question box in that panel, and type your question. Make sure you pull down the organizer in the pull-down menu. So go ahead and ask your questions from Stefan while we have him here. XR technology, I had not heard it referred to in that way. Obviously, it covers a lot of different technologies. You mentioned a few. Can you expand a little bit more on what that technology is and specifically how you see it being used, Stefan, in press technology and in metal stamping operations?
Well, let's just take as an example a press buyout. Now, when we first started doing our press buyouts, what we had to do is we were getting questions and buyout protocol sheets from our customers. We were then sending them to Korea. Korea then was taking a day to take pictures, make videos, and answer questions based on the criteria that the customer had asked. They would then send that back, and then the next day, well, obviously we have a 13-hour time difference. The next evening, we would sit and we would go through each of the pictures and then the videos and discuss those points, write down all the questions that the customer had, send that back to Korea. They would then the next day answer all those things, send in new pictures, do new videos, and send that back. With the XR technology, what we're able to do is we're able to virtually see everything that is going on in the actual facility itself. Now, it doesn't take into consideration it's a 13-hour time difference, but somebody can physically look either through a computer or an iPad, and they can see the person in Korea walking around, showing the person the actual press running itself. So yes, we do have the inconvenience of a 13-hour time difference, but what then happens is a person can ask live certain questions, and that person physically can go to the HMI screen, or they can go to the press controls. They can modify and change things, and they can do it just in time. This way, what it does is it takes away multiple days or multiple steps as far as the buy-off is concerned. When you're talking about service or emergencies, what then happens if a customer has a problem with their press, instead of having to go online to talk to a service tech, they can physically turn on a computer and show that person exactly what is going on with their press, or show the actual screens. So somebody can live action walk them through a process, which makes things a lot easier and less complex to work through.
Okay. How much of that do you see now? How quickly do you see it impacting the industry?
Well,
that's probably a hard question, but
I think what's going to happen is over the next months to years, the technology is going to expand and get better and better. I definitely see for service work and or emergency repairs, this being a huge benefit in the short term. But I would say that we're probably at least 6 to 9 months away before this is going to become more readily acceptable.
Okay. Okay, good. So, in terms of EVs, what is your perspective from where you come at the automotive industry? How quickly do you see EVs impacting automotive, and in particular the metal stampers serving the automotive market?
Well, I already see the EVs affecting the stamping market, whether it's by the higher strength steels that people are asking for, whether it's by the aluminums that people are looking at. Okay, I'm already seeing it happen. The biggest challenge that I see for metal stampers or metal formers is the fact that, we have a very robust market, but we also have an industry where a lot of our equipment is 15, 20 to 30 years old. And that equipment is going to have to be upgraded and replaced. Now, whether you decide to work with Simpac or you decide to work with one of our friendly competitors, pretty sure there's enough work to go around for everyone. But I honestly see that over the next 3 to 5 years, there is going to be a huge demand for new types of equipment, whether it be servo or standard mechanical. Each company has a different philosophy. We at Simpac are not going to try and tell you what you have to purchase. We listen to the customer and work with them on what they actually want.
Good. So for the benefit in particular of the people who did not attend your part 1 webinar on EV, talk a little bit about the use or companies that will try to use existing or older press technology for stamping EV parts, especially the parts that you've talked about in these presentations. Old press technology versus some of the newer, more flexible, I suppose, press technology.
Well, I wish I had Mike Stout here right now on the webinar together with me, because he'd be able to answer that 100 times better than I could. But just from learning a little bit from him through osmosis, I have seen that companies are using their older presses and they are maxing out the tonnages that they need for these parts. And what's happening is either the spring back of the materials or the snap through when you get the cut is reverberating through the older presses and cracking the frames and their crowns. You need to definitely review that and take a good hard look at the parts and the materials that you're using in the future, especially whether you're going to use nitrogen cylinders in your dies or you're going to go into higher and higher strength materials. That's why when you look at some of our competitors, they're absolutely insisting upon servo press technology. Some of our customers, however, don't necessarily feel that servo press technology is 100% the way to go. And instead, what they do is they get higher and higher tonnage mechanical presses, whether they be eccentric or link drive. And then they do different types of technological work in the dies themselves. I can't tell people which is better, because I honestly believe that the customer knows best. Just like my wife, she always knows best.
Nice. You had to throw that in there.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so you touched on, is there more you want to say then about servo and mechanical and link versus, and there's, how suitable they are for some of the aluminums, high strength steels, some of the other specialty materials?
Look,
or
again,
did you kind of say what you needed to there?
I'm not going to dictate to somebody what type of press equipment they have to purchase.
Yeah.
As a press manufacturer, I have certain preferences of what I want to try and sell, whether it's based on price, availability, or technology. At the end of the day, the customer and their engineering team are a lot of times a lot smarter than the press manufacturer is. Because remember, the press manufacturer, they sell a press. Most of the times, except for a couple of our competition, they're not really running the presses in production. The manufacturers, however, they're running them every single day in production. And they understand best what they need, what preferences they have, whether it's controls, automation, or type of press. We just try and guide them in a certain direction, but by no way, shape, or form do we try and tell them or dictate to them what they need to purchase.
What about, Stefan, the sizing of presses? Are you seeing more instances where stampers need more tonnage, or let's say a bigger press bed than might be standard with a, let's say, 1,000-ton press? Would they want a press bed that might be more, you might more expect to see on a 1,500-ton press, for example? So different combinations of press tonnage and bed size.
Okay, that's obviously a very a loaded and difficult question to answer. I will tell you this: in in many instances, we are seeing our customers getting rid of their smaller 500, 600-ton presses in preference for 800 to 1,000-ton presses because of the technologies and the materials they now have to use. In many instances, we're also seeing them go for a bigger bed press than what they had before so that they can add more flexibility to their production schemes. When you're going for higher tonnages, we also notice that a customer, if they can afford it, will try and get a press that is a couple hundred tons more than what they necessarily need, only because of the fact that they have then the flexibility for the future. It really, really sucks if you spend 3 to 5 million on, let's say, a 1,500 to 1,600-ton press, and then 3 years from now, you realize that you can't get that job because it needs 1,800 to 2,000 tons. So what we're seeing is we're seeing the customers in generalization to answer your question. Yes, we're seeing customers go and get rid of their smaller tonnage presses for higher tonnage. In many instances, we're also seeing them go away from a smaller bed size to a larger bed size. Now, with that said, we have certain customers that have existing pits. And based on that, they're constrained on what type of bed size they can have, or maybe what tonnage press they have, or what size they have based on the overhead crane or the height of their facility. Then, of course, they're just trying to get the exact same or very similar to what they had before. But the preference is for higher tonnage and for bigger bed.
Yep. Higher strength materials, more complex and bigger parts, right?
Yes.
More die stations, all of that. Okay. All right, good. Any more questions from the audience? Mike Stout, Stefan wants you to know that you did a great job answering the question. Without him, he is on the. So,
well, like I said, if I knew a tenth of what Mike Stout has forgotten about presses in his life, I would honestly consider myself an expert.
Very good. All right, any last minute questions for Stefan? Otherwise, we can wrap things up. We're just about reached the top of the hour here. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you, Stefan and Jamie, for putting together a really good solid presentation. Again, we will have the webinar and the PowerPoint up on our website within the next day or two. Everybody will get an email, so they'll be able to download that, take another look, spend some more time reading all the information on the slides, and then share it with some others in your organization. So everyone may close their browsers now. Hope you have a great afternoon. Certainly hope everybody has a great holiday week next week. So, all right, take care, everybody.